Hey Book Dragons, welcome back to my channel. Glad you could be here. Today we're talking about why I think you should read The Deathgate Cycle. Let's go. Thank you to my patrons. I really appreciate all you do to support the channel. So I recently finished reading The Deathgate Cycle and I had a phenomenal time. It is a 7-book series created by the same duo that created the initial Dragonlance novels, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. Now, I've not read the Dragonlance novels yet. I do plan to eventually, but the Deathgate Cycle is fantastic. So if you're familiar with Dragonlance, you can expect a lot of the same treatment, from what I understand anyway, of this new story, the Deathgate Cycle. It's not connected to Dragonlance in any way, shape, or form, but it is so much fun, guys. So we're going to talk about that today. I don't want to spend too much time on introductions. Let's just get right to it. I do want to let you know that I am going to be breaking this review up into sections. I will have timestamps down below as well, so that you can kind of go back and forth depending on what one you're most interested in hearing about. I'm going to start off talking about the world. I'm going to move on to the races that populate this world. Then we'll talk about the magic system. And then we'll talk about some of the key characters in the story. And finally, we'll talk about the plot. So I've got 5 different sections there, and you can find each one of those in the description below. This takes place in a post-apocalyptic Earth-like setting. A race of sorcerers known as the Sartan, who we'll talk about later, sundered this world into 4 different realms because they felt like the different races that populated the world were getting out of control. They were too violent, they were too warlike, and they were starting to come into too much self-awareness and self-indulgence, and the Sartan were really afraid that they were losing their grip in terms of power over the people. And they also had a race of quote-unquote enemies known as the Patron, who they were afraid would gain so much power that they would rise up and try to overthrow the Sartan. So they figured that the best course of action was to break the world up into 4 different realms, and they also created a 5th realm, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So the 4 realms that they created are based on the 4 major elements of creation. So you've got the world of air, which is Arianis. You've got the world of fire, which is called Prion. You've got the world of Abarak, which is the realm of stone or earth. And you've got the world of water, which is known as Chalestra. And each of these worlds has its own unique features, its own drawbacks, and its own dependence upon other things that exist in some of the other realms. But what's happened over time is, instead of the separate realms being able to work together, the sundering really completely disconnected them. And so over time they've become distant and completely cut off from each other. Now there is a 5th realm that I mentioned that is a prison world known as the Labyrinth. It kind of exists in an in-between space among all these realms, and that was specifically created as a re-education world for the Patron. Quote-unquote re-education. Torture, prison, you get the idea. So that is the major world that they have created. Now there are also a couple of other different portals that connect the worlds as well. The one portal is the Nexus. That is kind of the central hub that controls the labyrinth, and then you've got the vortex, which is the central waiting area that enters into the labyrinth. So when they first created the prison, they used the vortex to offload the patrons into the labyrinth. And then you got Death's Gate. So that is the third major portal, and Death's Gate can be used to travel between all of the different realms, including the labyrinth. And it is a major feature of this story, as you could probably tell, hence the name, the Death Gate cycle. So now let's talk about the different races in the world. You have the Sartans, which I mentioned before, and the Patrons, and we're going to talk about them together because they are very similar races. They are sorcerers, they are humanoid in appearance, and they may in fact be an evolved type of human. The Sartan have been considered by the other populations of the world as gods and worshipped as gods. And they were afraid that the patrons would rise up and usurp and take control of their authority, and so that's why they had initially imprisoned them. We talked briefly about that. But other than that, and a few distinguishing features, the Sartan and the Patron are virtually the same. They practice rune magic. Both of the races practice that. You also got humans and elves and dwarves. They are referred to by the Sartan and the Patron as the Mensch. Kind of a derogatory term to refer to the lesser beings that inhabit the world. You also have some animal and beast races like dragons and wolves and things like that show up in the world as well. There are snakes as well that show up, and we'll talk a little bit more about those as we go along. But one of the big ones that shows up a lot is dragons, and I absolutely love that. You know how much I love dragons, and there are dragons all over this series, primarily in the first book, which is called Dragon Wing, and then also in the fourth book, which is called Serpent Mage, but they are spattered throughout this series. So now let's talk about the magic. I mentioned that the Sartan and the Patron do rune magic. There are some differences with their magic though. It's all rune based, but the Patrons have tattoos of different designs and patterns on their skin, all over their body in fact, and those are used in chanting the runes to create their magical spells. So they might run their fingers or trace the runes as they're chanting them to have the magical effect. The Sartans, on the other hand, do not have tattoos on their skin. They sing and dance their runes. You have some Sartan in the books that you'll find that when they get ready to do their magic, they perform a kind of very fluid dance-like move in order to create the spell. And so that's pretty cool. I was really excited by how unique that was. And then you have the humans. The primary humans that use magic in this world are the Mysteriarchs in the world of Arianis. They live in the highest realm of Arianis, kind of in a kingdom cut off from everybody else. And they are very, very powerful magic users, although not nearly as powerful as the Sartan and the Patron. And then the elves have magic as well, but it's not used a whole lot, so we don't see it much. And then the dwarves don't really have magic to speak of. Their skills are more in technology and tinkering with things and figuring out how things work. One thing about the magic system in this book is there are different levels of information you can access about it. If you just want the basic enjoyment of this series, you can sit down and enjoy a relatively soft magic system, which means there's lots of displays of power and awe-inspiring moments, but it's not heavily focused on rules and regulations and limitations and that this is what's going to happen if you use too much of your magic. It doesn't really do that. Now, if you want more information on the magic system, though, you can get it. You will find that it is a very detailed magic system, especially the Patron and Sartan magic, and you will find information for that in the appendices of the different books. The appendices are extremely detailed, and you will find a great wealth of information on the Patron and Sartan magic systems, especially in Book 1, which is called Dragonwing. So now let's talk about some of the different characters. The primary character in this story is Haplo. He is a patron, and he is one of the first patrons who escaped the labyrinth with the assistance of Lord Zar, who is another character we'll talk about in just a moment. Haplo has a lot of anger and baggage that is built up with him and that he's hung on to for all of his years imprisoned in the labyrinth. Hatred for the Sartan, with good reason, right? I mean, they were imprisoned there for countless years. They do have a long lifespan, so it may have been hundreds of years that they were imprisoned in the labyrinth. And so he's got a lot of anger, a lot of hatred for the Sartan, and he really has a lot of a desire for vengeance against them. And he is the primary character of this story. There are a lot of supporting characters, some that you may even feel like are main characters, but really the main character that you're going to focus on throughout this whole story is Haplo. You also got Alfred, who is a Sartan, and he kind of stumbles into Haplo in his journeys throughout the different realms. He's kind of a bumbling oaf. He's always tripping over his own feet, and he's kind of cowardly as well. At the first sign of action and nervousness, or when he's embarrassed about something, Alfred is likely to faint. And after a while, it becomes a running joke among the people that he's around, because they're like, wait, Alfred, don't faint, come on, hold it together. so he's well known for doing that. You've also got Haplo's dog, which he just named Dog. That's his name in the story, because he's on a mission to get his vengeance and right wrongs, so he doesn't care about naming his pet, right? So he just calls the dog Dog. And the dog is very unique. The dog is an individual, and yet not. And I won't say any more about that because I don't want to spoil it for you. But if you like animal companions, Dog is an excellent character. I just absolutely loved him the entire time of this reading the story. Dog was just great. You also have Merritt, who is a patron zealot, strongly subservient to Lord Zar, and we'll talk about him right now as well. Lord Zar is the first patron to ever escape the labyrinth, and he has taken it upon himself to be the leader of the patrons and to right the wrongs and to conquer the four realms and bring them under control, bring them under subservience to him, and draw the world back together, albeit under an iron rule. And so Merritt, of course, having been led out of the labyrinth by Zar as well, she is deeply devoted to him, as is Haplo. At least at the very beginning, Haplo is extremely devoted to Lord Zar as well. Fanatical how devoted he is to Lord Zar. And so he has gone on a mission to serve Lord Zar, help prepare the way, so to speak, for Zar's takeover of the Four Realms. You also have a Sartan wizard named Zifnab. He is crazy. He's lost all his marbles. due to some event that I won't talk about it, but there was something along the way that caused him to lose all his marbles. And he is the traditional wizard type. He wears the long robes with all the funky designs on them, and he has this long pointy hat that he wears. And he's lucid sometimes, and other times he's just completely bonkers. And he will say things that you have no idea where he came up with it. And yet, I mean, he'll say things like, my name is Bond, James Bond, and things like that. So that's kind of what tells you that this is, at the very least, an Earth-like world, because he quotes a lot of references from Earth pop culture. And so when he's lucid, he's pretty helpful, but when he's not lucid, he's all over the place. And he is one of the major comic reliefs of this story, especially in the second book, Elven Star, which takes place on the world of Prion, the world of fire. He had me laughing out loud that whole book. It's one of the funniest books in the series, and mainly because of Zifnab. You also have another race of creatures known as the dragon snakes. Their origins are very unclear at the beginning of the series, but you start to learn what happened that brought them into being as you go along. And they thrive on fear. And so they are one of the main antagonists in the story as you get into the later books. And then the other character I want to talk about is Hugh the Hand. He is an assassin, and he gets hired for different jobs that play into the plot of the overall story. And he is quite an amazing character as well. I really enjoyed Hugh's story progression. There are other characters as well. I won't go into them here, but there is a large supporting cast, and I think you'll really enjoy them. So now let's talk about the plot, and we'll kind of wrap everything up. So as I mentioned, Haplo is one of the first patrons rescued by Lord Zar, and Lord Zar has commissioned Haplo to travel the different realms of the world and find out their weaknesses, find out what makes them tick, find out what unique features all of the worlds have, and learn about them, and then report back to Zar so that he can make appropriate preparations to take over the realms. So Haplo is essentially a spy for Lord Zar when the story first starts out. And along the way he encounters different characters, some of whom I mentioned previous to this, and he begins to learn over time that everything that he was taught and led to believe about the world and about his place in the world and about why he should harbor vengeance against the Sartans, he begins to learn that it's not all as it seems to be. Haplo's character arc throughout the entire story is just amazing. He evolves so much and he grows so much and he becomes close with so many people, where at the beginning he was a loner and he was determined to stay a loner and he was better off on his own. And it's just amazing to watch as he grows and matures in so many ways over this series, and begins to have a heart, because at the beginning he's very, very cold-hearted and using people for what he can get out of them and for his own devices. And it's just amazing to see the way he grows and changes over time. So he really is the main character of this story. The character study is really mostly about him, even though there are other characters in the story that you get to learn a lot about as well. And throughout the story, you will travel to each of the 4 realms. So the first 4 books each take place in one of the 4 realms. Dragonwing takes place in Arianas, Elven Star takes place on Prion, Fire Sea takes place on Abarak, and Serpent Mage takes place on Chalestra. And then the final 3 books are designed to wrap everything up in a nice little bow and hand it to you on a silver platter and say, okay, here's how everything works together, and leads to this final confrontation and the final resolution of the story. It's just really amazingly done. So you want to make sure to read this series in order because it is very much a linear story. You can't read one of the books out of order. I'm sorry, friends, it doesn't work that way. You do have to read it in order, and you won't get the full story unless you read the entire 7 books. So that's kind of an overview of the Deathgate cycle. Some unique features that I should mention about it. Number 1 is footnotes. All of the books have footnotes, not an abundance of them, but there are a few footnotes scattered throughout that give you little details about the world that you won't get from the text. Little helper notes as to what certain words mean or certain ideas mean. And I thought they were really helpful. Not everyone likes footnotes, I know. I thought they were quite helpful, and I'm glad they were there. In fact, I can't imagine the story without the footnotes. And then the other one I briefly mentioned is the appendices. The appendices are extremely detailed, and I highly recommend, if you get a chance, to read the appendices, especially if you like a lot more details about the world. These books are designed for different types of readers. You know, you can have the one reader who just wants to have fun and enjoy a journey, and you can just read the books without the appendices for that. But if you're more detail oriented and you want to know all the little intricacies about the world and the magic system, that's where you go to the appendices to find that out. And they're extremely detailed. They've got diagrams of the rune magic systems and diagrams of some of the different features of each world, and they've got some character studies. It's amazing the way that it's laid out. I think you should read this book series. Let me know in the comments if you have read the series. And if you have, great, you know what I'm talking about. What did you think of the series? If you have not read it before, have you even heard of it before? If this is your first time hearing about it, great. And if you have heard it and you've been on the fence about it, what do you think now? Does it sound like something that you would want to read? Let me know in the comments too. I hope this review was helpful to you, and I hope that this will give you a perspective on a new series that you might want to pick up and read. Until next time, guys, make sure you are reading more books. We'll talk soon.